A U.S. Army colonel was awarded a medal, the body of a fallen soldier was returned, and a flight was denied. What happened next shook the entire nation. No one expected that, amid the busy airport, where only procedures and schedules were supposed to matter, a wave of outrage would sweep the country, simply because one man refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. That morning, John F. Kennedy International Airport was just like any other. Noisy, hectic, filled with announcements over the PA system, the rumble of rolling suitcases over polished marble floors, and the chatter of children while adults frantically checked their departure gates. Amid that throng of people, one figure stood out. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in full-dress uniform, his chest adorned with medals, walking with a resolute stride as if each step were an oath of honor. That was Colonel Marcus Jackson, age 56, a longtime U.S. Army officer who had served more than 3 decades in combat zones, from the Balkans to the Middle East. His face revealed nothing, yet his deep-set eyes betrayed a calm born of hard experience. He didn't need anyone to know who he was, nor was he seeking the spotlight. He'd come for one and only purpose, to bring a young soldier home. That soldier was Private First Class Thomas Ellis, just 21 years old, killed in an ambush in Al-Anbar Province, Iraq. A young man who'd never made it to college graduation, never married his high school sweetheart, never saw his mother one last time. All that remained was a folded flag and an unfinished promise. No one left behind. On the tarmac, the flag-draped coffin waited, cold and silent. There was no honor guard standing by, no bugle playing a lament, just Jackson and that sacred duty. Jackson was no stranger to death. He'd lost comrades, witnessed silent sacrifices in bomb craters, on ambushed convoys, under a hail of artillery fire. Yet every time he escorted a brother-in-arms home, his heart felt as though it were being squeezed. Not from pain, but from responsibility. He knew that behind each casket was a family waiting, one mother, one sibling, a small hometown where the church bells would toll again for another fallen son. His boots clicked against the airport's marble floor, steady and deliberate. The rhythm matched his heartbeat. On his left breast, medals glinted under the fluorescent lights. A bronze star, a purple heart, a Legion of Merit. But today, all those honors meant nothing, because the soldier beneath that flag had never received any medals at all. In his left hand, he gripped a folder containing authorization documents, his military ID, the transport orders, and a handwritten letter from Thomas Ellis's mother, tucked into the shipment. The lines were shaky, ink blurred by tears. "Please bring my son home. We're still waiting for dinner, with him." Jackson drew in a steady breath. He knew he was about to embark on a different kind of mission, not a march to the battlefield, but a journey between the callousness of civilian bureaucracy and the dignity owed to a fallen soldier. Airports weren't battlefields, but sometimes the toughest fight was demanding respect for those who'd already paid the ultimate price. He approached the National Jet check-in counter, chin held high, breathing measured. A long line of weary passengers stretched behind him, none paying him any mind. But he didn't need the attention. He needed to complete his mission. He laid the folder down on the counter, gently but with conviction. The young check-in agent, a blonde woman named Amanda in a Navy uniform, accepted it. She nodded curtly and began typing. At that moment, Jackson had no way of knowing that a chain of events was about to begin. One challenge he'd never faced in his 34 years of service. It wouldn't be bombs or bullets or a distant battlefield, but something even more dangerous. The system's default indifference, silent discrimination, and nameless policies. And there, at counter number 4 in Terminal B, a new kind of battle quietly began. no one realized that in mere minutes, the entire nation would be watching this man, and the airline would wish they'd known who he really was. Just after Colonel Marcus Jackson placed the folder on counter number 4, he stood upright, his hands clasped lightly behind his back as though by an entrenched military reflex. The noisy sounds around him seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the clacking of keys as the check-in clerk worked. Amanda Whitaker, 26 years old, blonde hair tied in a ponytail, pale lipstick, a youthful face nevertheless tinged with the fatigue of long days at the airport, did not look up at him even once as she took the documents. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen, her fingers gliding over the keyboard in a rhythm of indifference. But when she reached the line that read, "Military Escort, Special Order," her hands paused for a moment. She frowned. She glanced over the file, then back at the screen, where the entry did not match any ordinary commercial ticket. And finally, for the first time since he approached the counter, Amanda looked up. Her gaze held no respect or sympathy, as many people did when they saw Marcus in uniform. No, it was a look mixed with suspicion and annoyance, a chill masked behind half-hearted politeness. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone striving for neutrality. "There's a problem with the ticket. We cannot allow you to board at this time." Those words struck Marcus like a cold blade slicing through the air. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes hardened, but his voice remained calm. "I'm on official military duty. This is the body of a fallen soldier. All procedures are in order." Amanda did not reply immediately. She just gave the screen a quick look, then turned to a male co-worker seated farther inside, leaning in to whisper something. Mumbled too low for anyone to hear, the co-worker nodded slowly, casting Marcus a fleeting glance, the kind you give someone when you've made up your mind before hearing the truth. She turned back and exhaled as if burdened by this matter. "I understand, sir, but right now, our system has flagged this flight as ineligible for special clearance boarding. Under current security policies, we cannot allow you to board." Policies. The word reverberated like a familiar excuse Marcus had heard countless times in various situations, especially those moments when he was denied not because of any fault of his own, but because of something invisible, his skin color. He didn't need to shout or argue. He only leaned forward slightly and withdrew a letter from the folder. "This is a deployment order from the military command. It bears a signature and an authentication code from the Department of Defense. The flight has been arranged, the seat has been confirmed. I suggest you verify it again." Amanda took the paper, her eyes skimming it quickly but not reading it carefully. She held it as if it were just another burdensome form rather than proof of a sacred mission. Then, to avoid further contact, she turned to whisper with her co-worker again, this time speaking more urgently. The two of them whispered back and forth rapidly. Marcus stood still, observing. From the vantage point of someone who had led hundreds of soldiers under high-pressure conditions, he could read what they didn't say out loud. Amanda was hesitating, not because of the system, not because of the paperwork, but because of his presence, a black man in uniform requesting something she wasn't comfortable handling. She felt uneasy, and rather than face it directly, she hid behind the two dreaded words. Policy. Behind him, passengers began to stir. A few glanced at him curiously. Others stared at Amanda as if trying to understand what was happening. A middle-aged man wearing a tie raised his eyebrows and checked his watch, appearing displeased at being held up in line. Yet Marcus remained standing tall, not budging. He looked like a pillar in the midst of the bustling crowd, calm but resolute. After a moment, another man emerged from the back area. His name was Walter Greeley, roughly in his early 50s, slightly stooped, wearing a name badge that read Operations Supervisor. His eyes were weary but cold, the kind of look worn by someone accustomed to handling difficult situations, by reciting the company's scripted lines. "Colonel," he began, his tone hollow as one who has lied many times before, "we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. However, due to internal policies and security regulations in effect today, you will not be able to board this flight." Marcus tilted his head, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Then explain to me, what policy prohibits an officer escorting a fallen soldier's remains from boarding a plane?" Walter pressed his lips together, not replying immediately. The question was too direct. His face twitched ever so slightly before folding into a forced smile. "We cannot publicly discuss the security policies in detail, sir. We are simply following orders. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." A familiar phrase, but Marcus knew its true meaning all too well. They know you have the right, but they don't want you to have it. It was a soft refusal, disguised in bureaucratic language. At that moment, none of them, Amanda, Walter, nor the waiting passengers, could have predicted that this seemingly routine action, this innocuous refusal, was about to ignite a blaze the airline could not extinguish. Marcus Jackson remained standing, unmoving, like a bronze statue amid the chaos of Kennedy Airport. There was no sudden anger in him, no dramatic gesture, only a heavy silence, the kind that made young soldiers tremble to attention when he fixed them with his gaze on the parade ground. And now, that same gaze was locked on Walter Greeley. The operations supervisor tugged at the collar of his dress shirt, slipping back into his usual corporate tone as if reciting a rehearsed note. "Colonel, as I said, this is nothing personal. There are special security policies recently put into effect, and unfortunately, we cannot be flexible in this situation." Marcus tightened his grip on his cap, his brows knitting together, but his voice remained calm. "I have worked with the TSA before. I have helped transport fallen soldiers' remains through at least 8 major airports over the past 15 years. I know the real policies, and I know empty excuses. What you just told me was an excuse." Walter froze. His eyes flicked toward Amanda, who stood behind him, awkwardly twisting her computer screen around as though searching for any escape from the tension. He was unaccustomed to facing someone like Marcus Jackson, someone who didn't have to raise his voice to make the room go still. Walter turned slightly, lowering his tone, striving to stay in control. "I understand you have experience, but, as you can see, this is a commercial flight, and when our internal system flags a red alert, we must follow protocol. No exceptions, no matter who you are." Marcus quietly repeated, "A red alert from the system?" He took a half step forward, his voice sharpening. "Or a red alert from your own minds? When you see a black man in uniform approach with a request you're not used to, what do you think first? Security or threat?" Walter frowned, but offered no rebuttal. Behind him, Amanda stood with her head slightly bowed, her fingers nervously tapping the touch-screen keyboard as if feigning busy work. But those trembling hands could not hide her unease. No one answered. Behind Marcus, the queue began to stall. A red-haired woman holding a small child glanced at him, then leaned to whisper to her husband. A young student in a gray hoodie paused his phone call, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. One by one, people began to sense that something was wrong, even if they didn't yet understand why. Marcus knew it, and he knew this was no longer just about him. "I am not asking for special treatment," he said, enunciating each word. "I am not seeking a free pass or an upgrade. I am simply completing the mission entrusted to me by this country. And you, representatives of a civilian system, are intentionally blocking that mission for no reason other than the word policy. Walter swallowed. A moment later, he did what Marcus had seen many people do in these situations. He shifted responsibility upward. I will call my superior. Perhaps they can offer a more appropriate resolution. Marcus nodded, but his eyes had shifted. It was no longer just personal indignation. His gaze now belonged to a man who understood that if he did not stand firm here today, then another soldier might be humiliated next time, and no one would know. Amanda stole a glance at him over her computer screen, her expression no longer haughty as it had been. She recognized the dignity in his every action, something a uniform alone did not automatically confer, but which this man made undeniably present. Walter took a few steps back, pulled his phone from his back pocket, and walked through a frosted glass door marked Staff Only. Marcus Jackson did not flinch. Inside him, the silent fire of fallen soldiers burned fiercely, and he knew that what was happening was not merely a passing insult, but a test to see whether a soldier's honor still mattered to this system, and Marcus Jackson would not fail that test. The frosted glass door closed behind Walter Greeley, leaving an awkward emptiness between the check-in counter and the veteran soldier, who still stood motionless like a stone pillar in the terminal. A strange silence enveloped counter number 4. Amanda remained there, her hand hovering over the touch-screen keyboard, but she had stopped typing long ago. The cold detachment in her eyes was gone, replaced by a vague unease, worry, even fear. Marcus Jackson did not turn around, but he felt the shift in the atmosphere behind him. The crowd was beginning to sense that something was seriously wrong. Then, like a bolt of lightning ripping through that hush, a voice rang out, old, raspy, but commanding. I served 30 years and never saw a soldier on duty get stopped like this. Who do you think you're messing with? His words struck the polished marble floor like a hammer, causing everyone to look up in unison. The voice belonged to an older man, his beard flecked with gray, wearing a U.S. Marine Corps cap. Though his age was obvious, he stood ramrod straight. On his chest was a row of faded ribbons. This was Charles Baker, a former Marine who had fought in Vietnam. Marcus didn't have to look to know that this was someone who understood a soldier's honor. He offered no nod, no signal, but his eyes flickered slightly. That intervention was necessary, not for him but for the truth. At the same time, off to the right, a young man in a leather jacket with Beats headphones pulled out his phone and started recording. Not long after, a young woman, about 20 years old with purple-dyed hair and a Columbia University student ID hanging from her neck, lifted her phone above her head and began a live stream. You're watching live from JFK Airport. A U.S. Army colonel is being refused boarding while escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. What on earth is happening here? Her question, carried by her phone's speaker, was clear and sharp as a blade. People began to turn, curious, then stunned. A middle-aged woman, holding a sleeping child on her shoulder, stepped forward, looked at Marcus with sympathy, then leaned to whisper to her husband. The man drew out his phone and started filming too. The atmosphere in the domestic terminal of Kennedy Airport was no longer mere everyday bustle. It had become a silent arena. Gazes that had been indifferent shifted to open attention, then to outrage. Phones now bore witness. Every recording, every tweet jabbed at the mask the system was desperately trying to maintain. Amanda swallowed, her eyes darting toward the frosted glass door, where Walter still had not returned. She seemed on the verge of running after him, but was held back by the weight of Marcus's presence behind the counter. He said nothing. He understood the power of well-timed silence, and this time he would let others speak for him. Charles Baker stepped forward, his eyes shining, his voice resonating through the area. When I was young, we were taught that anyone in uniform represents the nation on the battlefield, and this country, at the very least, can give them a decent flight home. Now you're telling me even that's gone? A few weak yeahs echoed from the crowd, then grew stronger. A white woman in a denim jacket spoke up, her frustration audible. If he were a white soldier, would you treat him this way? Her question rang like a call to conscience. The stark truth was laid bare. No one needed to elaborate. What had begun as a mere paperwork snag had become a symbol of discrimination. Invisible but unmistakable. Amanda's hands trembled as she reopened the booking interface and typed Jackson Marcus L. again, as though searching for hope in the system. But the message, flagged for internal security review, remained glaringly red. Now she realized that the red flag hadn't come from the computer system, but from the biases embedded in her workplace. The frosted glass door behind remained closed. Walter had not yet returned. But the fight had begun, and this time Marcus was not alone. The air at the JFK check-in area suddenly felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. An invisible energy began to rise, seeping into every gaze, every breath, every movement of people who, moments before, were strangers. Then, like a spark igniting a dry forest, a small action started to set everything ablaze. A white woman with wavy brown hair, about 24 or 25 years old, wearing a crossbody bag and holding an iPhone 13 Pro Max, stepped toward Marcus. Her face was tense, her eyes shining with indignation. On her collar was the logo of a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting veterans' rights. "Excuse me, they're not letting you board?" she asked quietly, but her eyes were steady. Marcus nodded shortly, his voice low and measured. "That's right." Without hesitation, she turned her screen toward the crowd. In the frame was his calm face, his uniform immaculate, and behind him a growing line of onlookers falling silent. "Everyone, you're watching live from JFK," she raised her voice, choosing each word carefully. "A Black Army colonel is escorting a fallen soldier's remains, and they're refusing to let him board with no valid reason. No system error, no security threat, just policy. So where's the justice?" In less than a minute, the number of viewers spiked. Heart, anger, and outrage emojis flooded the screen. Comments popped up one after another. "Waff? Why are we treating a hero like this? Somebody call the media. Tag at CNN, at Fox News, at MSNBC right now." Behind Marcus, a young white man in a gray hoodie with a laptop backpack also started live streaming in a furious tone. "I'm here live at JFK. National jet staff just refused to let a soldier on duty board, just because of some internal security policy. No one will give any clear explanation. This is wrong, and people need to see it." Amanda, standing behind the counter, gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles went white. She could no longer contain the fear coursing through her like electricity. Phones were being raised everywhere, turning into weapons of witness. Now, every second that passed became damning evidence. A middle-aged black woman in an olive-green jacket stepped closer to the crowd. She didn't speak, she simply live-streamed, tears welling in her eyes. In her video, Marcus's face appeared clearly, a symbol of calm in the eye of an unfolding storm of injustice. And then it happened. A tweet, the first from Lily, the young woman who started the first live stream, was shared. At Lily writes, "Now, a Black Army colonel, in uniform, escorting a fallen soldier's remains, was just denied boarding at JFK by National Jet Air. No cause, no respect." Let him fly. Honor our soldiers. Beneath it was a 35-second video showing Marcus standing still, Amanda looking flustered, and former Marine Charles Baker's clear voice, "Who do you think you're messing with?" Less than 10 minutes later, that tweet had 12,000 retweets. A reporter for The Guardian quoted the video with this comment, "Unbelievable that this is America in 2025. At JFK, a U.S. soldier in uniform was prevented from bringing his comrade home. Let him fly." Hashtags began popping up across Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Let him fly. Respect our heroes. Rodas National Jet fail. In front of counter number 4, a half-circle crowd had formed. Passengers no longer moved on. They stood like a silent wall around Marcus. A wordless respect, but louder than any airport announcement. Farther off, an airline technician wearing headphones rushed by, then stopped to look at the unfolding scene. He pulled out his phone, scrolled quickly, and his eyes widened. The story was already on Google News. Amanda took a step back. She turned to a female co-worker at counter number 5, whispering in panic, "It's going viral! Shit!" In another corner, a child asked her mother, "Mom, why isn't that man being allowed on the plane?" The mother was silent, squeezing her child's hand. She had no easy answer, because what was happening had no simple explanation. Marcus Jackson remained unmoving, chin held high, one hand lightly resting on his beret. He didn't need to say another word, because, by now, the world had begun speaking for him. The crowd that once rushed through JFK Airport now stood frozen, as if time itself had stopped. No one cared about missed flights or waiting luggage anymore. Every eye, every camera lens, every phone was turned toward counter number 4, where a man in uniform still stood tall, his hand gripping his beret, as if holding fast to his resolve, while those representing a cold, unyielding system began to crumble under undeniable pressure. A middle-aged woman in a faded denim jacket, her voice sharp with indignation, turned to her husband and pointed at the counter. "This is disgraceful. Even that child knows this is wrong. What are you people doing?" Her words, spoken into a sea of silence, cut through every layer of so-called polite policy. No more doubt, no more hiding. This was wrong, nakedly, blatantly wrong, and utterly inexcusable. Behind the counter, Amanda could barely stand. Her face went pale, her hands trembling as she tried again to re-enter Marcus Jackson's booking code into the system. But every keystroke felt meaningless. She no longer believed she had any control. The system wasn't confined to her computer. It was out there, in the harsh stares of hundreds of people, filming, sharing, and seething with outrage. She glanced toward the frosted glass door where Walter Greeley, her supervisor, had walked in a few minutes ago to contact his superior. But the door remained closed and silent. He had not returned. Not a word, not a plan. Amanda was left alone in the eye of a storm. She felt it keenly as voices began to rise from every direction, like ripples spreading across water. "I just saw this video on Twitter. Fox News is already covering it. E-Veterans United just retweeted. There's even a veterans group commenting. Good grief, he's really a colonel, and they treat him this way?" An Asian man in a gray suit, rolling luggage and holding his young son's hand, stepped forward. He spoke with urgency. "I once escorted my father, a World War II veteran, home. I know what that feels like. And now I'm watching this. It's heartbreaking." Amanda lowered her head. She felt completely exposed. Words like policy, security, and internal protocol no longer shielded her. They were nothing but empty excuses, shattering under the storm of truth. Marcus Jackson remained unmoving, his expression no longer burning with anger, but instead quietly radiating profound disappointment. To him, Walter's silence, Amanda's discomfort, and those vague references to internal policy weren't new. He had encountered them his entire life. From the first time a white commander refused to shake his hand at deployment, to a fellow soldier's funeral where the name was mixed up simply because they looked alike. Yet never, not once in the 21st century, did he imagine his country would refuse him the dignity owed to his final duty. Amanda's keystrokes ceased altogether. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes red-rimmed. I am truly sorry." Marcus did not reply. He did not need an apology, and he knew that right now, an apology was meaningless. Another passenger, a black college student with curly hair wearing a backpack, moved forward, speaking in a calm, reasoned tone. "The real question is, if he weren't in uniform, if there were no live stream, if he weren't black, would you have done the same thing? Without cameras, how many people have been treated like this without anyone ever knowing?" Amanda had no answer, and at that moment no one on the airline staff could answer. Phones buzzed from every direction. One passenger had just checked his phone and exclaimed, "It's on the front page now. Breaking news. Army colonel denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier. Viral video raises questions." CNN, the New York Times, NBC, they're all covering it. This airline is finished. A little girl of about 10, clutching her mother's hand, asked innocently, "Mom, why did they refuse him?" Her mother bent down, took the child's shoulder and whispered, "Because grown-ups sometimes forget what's right." No one at the counter dared look at Marcus anymore, because the truth was now so glaringly obvious that no one could pretend not to see it. After the little girl's innocent question, the atmosphere in the check-in area felt frozen. No one spoke, no one laughed, and no one moved. All life in that space seemed held in place by the weight of the truth. And then, in that seemingly endless silence, Charles Baker, a former Marine with weathered eyes and the hardened face of someone who had lived through 2 wars, quietly stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, though husky, carried undeniable weight. "I've seen discrimination before, but this is the first time I've seen a uniform treated with such contempt." Those words hit like a hammer, shattering the thin glass of procedure, policy, and oversight. They didn't ring loudly, but they rang true, and that truth compelled everyone holding a phone to fall silent and look up. Fingers that had just tapped record paused for a moment, simply to listen. Behind the counter, Amanda bowed her head, her gaze fixed on the keyboard. Each word Charles spoke cut into her mind, slicing away any defense. In her head, there was no longer a booking system, no internal codes, no HR interface. Instead, there was the face of Marcus Jackson, unyielding, unruffled, yet somehow making her feel utterly ashamed through his silence alone. A middle-aged white woman in a business skirt, wearing the badge of a major financial firm, spoke up loudly. "He's a military officer, not a troublemaker. If you keep blocking him, I'll call my lawyer right now." A Latino man in an airport uniform quietly removed his gloves, stepped up to the counter and said softly, "I served in Afghanistan. I know that look. The look of someone being humiliated yet refusing to break." Those isolated voices began to connect, like small streams converging into a powerful waterfall. A wave of outrage spread, leaderless, unorganized. When people perceive injustice, they can't stand idly by. Marcus Jackson, still standing at the center, surveyed each face around him. In his eyes, for the first time, a glimmer of emotion surfaced. not because he needed them to side with him, but because they chose to stand up for what was right. Just then, from a distance, a technician ran up at a frantic pace. He reached the counter, leaned in to whisper to Amanda while holding up his phone. "It's straight on CNN. Fox is covering it too, and there's a tweet from the National Veterans Organization. They're calling this the Airline's disgrace." Amanda looked as if she might collapse. At that moment, a group of 3 young men, apparently students, standing near a boarding gate joined in. One of them held up an iPad, displaying the viral tweet, "Breaking, U.S. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. The world is watching. Let him fly. Honor our soldiers." Conversations rippled outward to the neighboring gates. Check-in agents at counters 6 and 7 looked over anxiously. Some began making hushed calls, hurried and tense. Then, the biggest signal appeared. A man standing near the boarding gate, wearing a badge from the veterans of foreign wars, made a call in the middle of the crowd, his voice cold and resolute. "I don't care which airline this is. If this isn't resolved in 10 minutes, we're going to do more than just post about it." At that moment, Walter Greeley finally pushed open the glass door and emerged. But his face had completely changed. No confidence, no sense of command. Sweat beaded on his brow, his collar was rumpled, and he still held his phone, call not yet ended. He was trapped between 2 waves, the explosion of truth coming from outside and the collapse happening within. But before he could say a word, Marcus turned to him. He looked Walter squarely in the eyes. His voice was low, each word sharp as a military command. "You don't owe me an apology. Apologize to that soldier lying out on the tarmac, the one you refused, not with your words, but by turning your back and staying silent." The entire terminal fell into hushed stillness. And in that rare moment everyone felt it. The truth no longer belonged to the person holding the microphone. It lay in the eyes of those who bore witness. Immediately after Marcus Jackson finished speaking, his words cutting through Walter Greeley's thin veneer like a blade, the entire terminal fell into a stunned silence. No one applauded, no one cheered, yet every gaze remained locked on the man in uniform, as if they had just heard a new oath, not from the Pentagon, but from conscience itself. Walter tried to maintain his composure, but his face went pale. His eyes blinked rapidly, as though searching for solid ground amidst an invisible collapse. Before he could say a word, a security officer, young, tall, athletic build, wearing a dark blue uniform and a name tag reading Brian Simmons, stepped forward, his expression serious, phone in hand with a video already queued up. "You need to see this," Brian said quietly but firmly enough to freeze everyone standing in front of the check-in counters. Walter took the phone, his face drained of color almost instantly. On screen, a breaking news banner in bold red scrolled across the top. National Jet Airlines refused boarding to Colonel Marcus Jackson, U.S. Army officer, while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. Outrage erupts online. Veterans groups demand investigation. #1, let him fly, climbs to #1 nationwide within 22 minutes. Below the banner, the video showed Marcus standing silently opposite Amanda, an excerpt from one of dozens of viral clips circulating on social media. Behind him, passengers formed a circle, many holding phones, some wiping away tears. Walter stiffened, his finger trembling as he scrolled. Comments appeared one after another. "Shameful. Why treat someone carrying out his final duty like this? I'm a veteran. I've never been this angry. If the airline doesn't speak up now, they'll never earn my trust again. Silence rose up like a wall pressing down on Walter's shoulders. He handed the phone back to Brian as if it were scorching hot. But the nightmare did not end there. From the customer service desk, another airline employee rushed over, out of breath and looking sickly pale. "Walter, the CEO's office is calling. They say things are out of control. On the aviation forums, the pilots' union is getting involved too. Some pilots are refusing to fly national jet flights until this is resolved." Amanda, still standing behind the counter, clutched the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles turned white. Messages from the internal system flashed in rapid succession. Level 2 alert. External media swarming the check-in area. Immediate executive intervention required. The entire operational system was beginning to reel. Not because of a technical glitch, but because the truth had slipped beyond anyone's control. Near the boarding gates, a crew member in a silver-gray vest named Michael Torres whispered to a female colleague, "I just got a notice from the Pilots Association. If the airline doesn't apologize and restore his honor immediately, they won't operate any departures from JFK for the next 24 hours. This is huge." Among the passengers, an older couple who had been silent until now stepped forward. The husband spoke, his voice shaky but resolute. "I lost my brother in Fallujah. If someone like him can be treated this way, what has this country become?" Marcus did not move from his spot. He watched the rising waves of indignation, not with triumph, but with the solemn eyes of someone who had seen the truth ignored too many times. But this time, he knew. This wasn't because he'd done something different, but because the people around him refused to remain silent. Meanwhile, Walter backed away toward the information desk, fumbling to return calls. His voice no longer held the authority of a supervisor. It shook, rushed, and tangled. Words like crisis management, media, and suspension hung in the air. From a distance, someone exclaimed, "Look, MSNBC is broadcasting live from the main entrance." A news van with a satellite dish had arrived. In that instant, Walter realized the game was over, and it was no longer in his hands. There was no more spin, no more denial. The system he had once believed would protect him was now collapsing from within. Just as Walter Greeley was fumbling through urgent phone calls, sweat beading on his collar, a figure appeared at the far end of the domestic terminal corridor, standing tall and silent, yet as shocking as a thunderclap. The man wore a deep blue uniform with senior officer insignia on his lapels. His polished black shoes clicked out a steady march beat across the chaos of the civilian terminal. On his shoulder was the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, and on his nameplate read D. Thomas. He strode directly to counter number 4, where every eye was fixed, and stopped in front of Marcus Jackson. No introduction was needed, no protocol required. He stood at attention and snapped a perfect military salute. As soon as he spoke, the surrounding noise seemed to vanish into silence. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Thomas, representing Army Command from the Pentagon. We are aware of what has occurred." His words hit like a bolt of lightning at high noon. Nearby, airport staff froze. Walter stood rooted in place, eyes wide, mouth agape but unable to speak. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas turned to Marcus, his expression grave yet deeply respectful. "Colonel Jackson, you and Private Ellis will not be flying commercial. A military aircraft is on standby. A C-40A from Andrews Air Force Base has been dispatched on an emergency order. The crew is ready. You may board at any time." Those words stripped away the final mask of so-called internal policy the airline had hidden behind. The crowd seemed to explode in stunned awe. A young woman broke into tears. The Latino man from earlier clutched his fist as though witnessing justice finally done. Marcus Jackson stood tall, met Lieutenant Colonel Thomas's gaze and gave a slight nod, a nod rich with layered meaning. Respect, acceptance, and affirmation that his stand had not been in vain. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas did not turn to address the airline staff directly, but his eyes swept over the check-in area with the steely resolve honed by combat and discipline. Walter tried to step forward, seeking to reclaim some shred of authority he once held. He bobbed his head, speaking in a trembling voice. "Sir, we were just following policy. There may have been a misunderstanding in our system." Lieutenant Colonel Thomas cut him off without hesitation, his tone as sharp as a command. "There was no misunderstanding. You were exposed." He then turned back to Marcus once more. "I have orders not only to assist you, but to ensure this entire matter is escalated to the highest level. No one has the right to dishonor a soldier carrying out his final duty." The hush in the check-in area became almost tangible. Amanda, her hands still hovering over the keyboard, but now withdrawn into trembling fists, seemed ready to melt into the floor. She had once believed that a smile and obedience to protocol would keep her safe. But now, faced with a representative of the Pentagon and a wave of national outrage building behind her, she realized passivity is never harmless. A phone rang nearby, then another, then a third. A passenger had just pulled out his phone and whispered to the person next to him, "Fox News has confirmed it. The government is involved." A CBS reporter, sporting a jacket with the network's logo, had managed to push into the crowd. Her camera was rolling and her microphone extended, but Lieutenant Colonel Thomas paid neither camera nor reporter any heed. He simply added one final statement before dipping his head in salute to Marcus again. "Colonel, the crew awaits you at runway 18R. Whenever you're ready, we can depart." Marcus Jackson took a deep breath. He scanned the crowd with quiet dignity, acknowledging each person by sight. Charles Baker, the veteran who had spoken first. Lily, the young woman live-streaming. Brian, the security guard who had provided irrefutable evidence, and the many others who dared to stand still, refusing to hurry along as though none of this concerned them. No one knew that, in that instant, Marcus felt something more important than honor. It was the community's awakening, a resistance that required no weapons, an alliance with no commander. He turned back to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas, his voice calm, solemn, warm. "Let's go, Lieutenant Colonel. Private Ellis awaits." The moment Marcus Jackson finished speaking to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas, a hurried voice rang out from the other side of the circle of filming onlookers and gathering passengers. A middle-aged man, neatly groomed hair, wearing a dark suit and a shiny nameplate reading Scott Davis, Director of Public Relations, had pushed past security guards, tugging annoyingly at his tie. He didn't appear like someone prepared to handle a crisis. Instead, he looked as if he'd been yanked from his office into the middle of a battle he never saw coming. Seeing Marcus, he immediately strode forward, raising both hands in an exaggerated display of neutrality and openness, his tone a mix of tension and flattery. "Colonel Jackson, I'm Scott Davis, Director of Public Relations for National Jet. First, on behalf of the airline, I want to offer my deepest apologies. This was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding. No intention to offend, absolutely no malice. It was all just a system glitch." Marcus didn't so much as blink. He stared directly at Scott with a calmness that suggested he'd heard these exact words countless times before, and knew exactly what they really meant. He slowly asked, "A misunderstanding?" Scott nodded quickly, pulling a tissue from his pocket to wipe his brow. Behind him, Amanda and Walter hovered like students caught cheating. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas's presence, the media, the passengers, the live stream, All of it hung over Scott like a hovering blade. Marcus inhaled slowly and then spoke, quietly but loudly enough for the entire area to hear. If there were no video, if there weren't hundreds of people filming, if there were no social media, how much longer would I, an officer on duty, have had to stand here, Mr. Davis? The air grew still. Scott tensed, sweat dripping again. I don't have an answer for that. Marcus didn't wait for more. I do. The answer is far too long. And the reason I had to stand here so long wasn't because of a system error. It was because there are people in your system who can't believe that someone like me, a black man in uniform, has the right to request something they don't understand. A low murmur rippled from the crowd behind. A woman wearing a press badge opened her notebook to write. A CBS camera operator leaned forward, adjusting her mic. Scott swallowed hard. His voice faltered, weak and sinking as a stake driven into quicksand. We truly apologize. We commit to investigating and handling anyone involved. Marcus cut him off again. I don't need a scapegoat. I'm not demanding the firing of a young clerk or an overworked manager. I demand accountability from the entire system. Not because I was denied boarding, but because of how people reacted when caught out, not with remorse, but with damage control. Scott had nothing more to say. He just stood there, attempting a smile that fell flat. Next to Marcus, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas remained at attention. He looked at Scott, then gave a slight nod to a young officer standing alongside him. That officer immediately nodded back and pulled out his phone, beginning to take notes. A woman near Gate 9 spoke up. He's right, this isn't a technical error, it's a cultural error, rooted in silence and fear of difference. A college student, live streaming since the beginning, shouted, "What if he weren't in uniform? Just an ordinary black man? What would happen then? How many people like that have been pushed aside without anyone knowing?" That question struck at the deepest core of truth, beyond the reach of media edits, beyond the airline's flimsy excuses. Scott removed his glasses, wiped his eyes, but not from emotion, from the glaring light of cameras aimed at him. By now, whatever he said, a belated apology from a rotten system no longer sounded like an apology. It only sounded like further theatrics. Marcus took a step back. He turned to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas. I don't want extra privileges. I don't need a first-class ticket or a grand escort. I only need respect. And I need that not just for me, but for the man lying silent out there, Private First Class Thomas Ellis. The crowd bowed their heads. A white woman quietly placed her hand over her heart. A tall black man's eyes welled with tears as he nodded repeatedly. Charles Baker clenched his fist at his side, saying nothing, but his eyes shone like the final charge into battle. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We are ready, Colonel." Marcus gave a slight nod. Then he turned back to look out the glass doors, where the flag-draped coffin waited. This mission was not yet over. But for National Jet Airlines, a new and devastating chapter had just begun. Marcus Jackson and Lieutenant Colonel Thomas exited the check-in area in the solemn silence of the crowd like a ceremony without drums or trumpets. But when the glass doors closed behind them, what remained at National Jet's Counter 4 was a media aftershock spreading like a tsunami. Scott Davis, Director of Public Relations, stood frozen as if turned to stone. Behind him, Amanda discreetly pulled out her phone, not to speak, but to witness what she had unwittingly helped ignite on an uncontrollable scale. Right at the gate entrance, 3 reporters from major networks took their positions. Live broadcast equipment was set up, cameras with microphones turned on, and CNN, NBC, and Fox News mics pointed directly at the remaining crowd. One of them, a short-haired CNN reporter, looked straight into the lens. "We're live at JFK Airport, where a U.S. military officer was denied boarding while escorting his fallen comrade. This story has sent shockwaves across the nation." Meanwhile, on social media, the hashtags number #LetHimFly and number Honor Our Soldiers shot to the top 2 spots nationwide within just 41 minutes of the first video being posted. On Twitter, hundreds of retweets flew by every second. Angry captions flooded every platform. A black colonel was prevented from carrying out his final duty. This isn't just discrimination, it's pure humiliation. No special treatment needed, just respect, and apparently we can't even manage that. The National Veterans Organization, NVVO, issued a press release just 20 minutes after the incident, with a headline that rocked the country. "When the honor of our military is trampled in the very land they swore to protect, silence is no longer an option." At the same time, numerous members of Congress from both parties spoke out on their personal platforms. Senator William H. Carter, D. Maryland, "Colonel Jackson deserves our respect. Any system that allows this kind of silence to persist is a system in need of accountability." Representative Rebecca Lang, R. Texas, "Party affiliation doesn't matter. Military honor is non-negotiable. National Jet must be held responsible." The controversy quickly transcended partisan lines. Celebrities from various fields joined in. R&B singer Tiana Brooks, "I can sing the national anthem every night, but if this keeps happening, what's the point?" Actor Michael Rendell shared the video with the caption, "This isn't a system error, this is a faulty system." As TV networks continued coverage, the focus shifted from reporting the incident to analyzing the subtle, systemic racism within airlines and the service industry. Afternoon news programs featured expert commentary. Why was a uniformed officer refused without any clear explanation? How many others have been treated this way when no one's watching? Investigative reporters started digging up similar cases, from black passengers removed from flights without cause to military personnel forced to buy new tickets on government-funded trips. An internal National Jet email was leaked, showing mid-level management instructing staff to remain silent and refuse comment until legal guidance. That email became proof that the airline was stalling rather than confronting the issue. The leak spread like wildfire online, further fueling public outrage. Meanwhile, at National Jet's headquarters, executives convened an emergency meeting, but not just to discuss public relations strategy. They were facing the biggest crisis in the company's history. Their stock plummeted 9% in a single trading session. Dozens of customers canceled tickets and publicly vowed never to fly with the airline again. A Reuters reporter revealed that at least 3 military organizations had canceled all domestic transport contracts with National Jet, including an $11 million plus contract from a federal military academy. Amid it all, Walter Greeley and Amanda Whitaker, 2 employees accustomed only to following the protocol, found themselves confronting something they never anticipated. The truth the whole nation was now witnessing. They were no longer nameless cogs in the system. They had become symbols of a culture the public demanded be abolished. When the final video clip showing Marcus Jackson stepping into the military vehicle bound for the runway played across evening newscasts, an emergency meeting was underway on the 23rd floor of National Jet's Manhattan headquarters, in an atmosphere more stifling than ever before. All eyes were glued to the live-streamed market chart on the large screen. The stock price line plummeted as if under sniper fire on a financial battlefield. It wasn't a gentle fluctuation, but a 12% nosedive in just 48 hours. Over $1.3 billion in market capitalization had vanished. The chief financial officer, paler than ever, whispered to the CEO, "Unless we issue an official response by tomorrow noon, the major investment funds will pull out." At the same time, on change.org, a petition titled "Demand National Jet Be Accountable for Humiliating a Military Officer" garnered over 20,000 signatures overnight. In the comments, people called out loudly, "Fire the CEO! Fire the entire executive team! I'm a veteran, and my family will never use this airline's services again." Show them that loyalty is not something they're allowed to trample. Customers canceled tickets en masse. More than 37,000 reservations were dropped within 24 hours, according to leaked internal data. Online booking platforms like Expedia, Kayak, and Orbitz began flagging reliability concerns whenever customers searched for national jet flights. On social media, a nationwide boycott campaign called Number No Fly with Hate was launched. Users changed their profile pictures to a beret icon with the caption, "I stand with Colonel Jackson. I honor Private Ellis." Not only individuals, but also numerous organizations spoke out. The Airline Pilots Association issued a stern statement. "We cannot remain silent when those who pledge to protect our country are humiliated by callous keyboards and indifferent management." The American Legion announced it was terminating all transport contracts with the airline. Some military academies even recommended that cadets avoid using National Jet for both personal and official travel until the airline commits to restoring honor for all service members. Inside the company, crisis calls never stopped coming. Amanda Whitaker, the employee who had been at the check-in counter, was placed on indefinite suspension. There was no internal meeting, no farewell. She was summoned to a private room and handed an envelope containing a single note. "You are placed on leave pending investigation." Amanda walked out of the building with hollow eyes. She did not cry or speak. She only looked up at the sky, the same sky under which she once believed each passenger was no more than a booking code, not a person with dignity and history. Walter Greeley, the mid-level supervisor who had quietly retreated to the glass office and left Marcus to face the system alone, was urgently summoned to the board chairman's office. Insider sources say he was asked to resign voluntarily before being officially terminated. Amid the crisis, the airline's CEO, Joanne Whitman, had yet to appear publicly. But inside the company, she faced harsh criticism for not reacting swiftly. A leaked recording from a closed-door meeting revealed her saying, "We can't let a single incident ruin our entire operating model." Once that remark reached the public, it became the last straw. A small protest began forming outside the airline's headquarters. Veterans carried flags, photos of Marcus Jackson, and banners reading, "He is not alone. Respect our military, or lose all your customers." We will remember Private Ellis. You will never forget this incident. Meanwhile, Marcus Jackson said nothing. He refused all interviews, declined every television invitation. He did only one thing: accompanied Lieutenant Colonel Thomas to bring Private First Class Thomas Ellis back to his hometown in Savannah, Georgia, where his family was still waiting. No speeches, no social media posts. Yet that very silence made the truth resonate more loudly than any statement. Respect is not a privilege, it is a standard. And if society needs a media crisis to relearn that lesson, then the cost we paid was far too high. For 3 days of frantic silence, while the stock kept plummeting, customers turned away en masse, and the media hordes continued their coverage. National Jet's leadership huddled in closed-door meetings, scrambling for a strategy to extinguish the fire they themselves had ignited under their own reputation. Finally, under pressure, they could no longer postpone. Evelyn Grant, The acting CEO stepped in front of a national television camera. A solid color backdrop, no reporters, no questions. Just a one-sided video broadcast filmed at the airline's headquarters and simulcast on CNN, NBC, and YouTube Live. Evelyn wore a white blouse, her face frozen as though expertly made up to show zero emotion. The lighting had been carefully arranged to make her look polished, but not enough to conceal how insincere she appeared. "On behalf of National Jet Airlines," she began, her delivery measured, each word sounding rehearsed from a script. "I sincerely apologize to Colonel Marcus Jackson, the family of Private First Class Thomas Ellis, and the U.S. veterans community. We deeply regret the incident that occurred at JFK Airport." A mechanical pause. Then she continued, not making direct eye contact with the camera. "We are currently reviewing our internal procedures and will place all personnel involved on suspension pending the investigation. This is not how National Jet represents the values we hold dear." The video ended after 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Concise, indifferent, and leaving behind only a chilling void of sincerity. Public reaction was immediate. On Twitter, a flood of veteran groups, community accounts, activists, and even celebrities hit back. Veterans, for truth. Suspension isn't justice. An empty apology can't wash away the humiliation of a soldier's honor. Tiana Brooks, R&B singer, reposted the video with caption, "If there were no cameras, no live stream, would she even apologize? Or is she only sorry she got caught?" Army Mom, 24. "My son wears a uniform too, and I fear the day he'll be refused, not because of a system error, but because some people don't want someone like him to have that dignity." The National Veterans Council, previously waiting to see how things would unfold, issued an official statement of protest. "We cannot accept a hollow, one-way broadcast with no dialogue and no concrete commitments. This is not an apology. This is evasion." The human rights organization Liberty and Equity even called on the U.S. Department of Transportation to launch an investigation into potential systemic discrimination in the airline's passenger handling procedures. A former service member, Elijah Mathers, who had served in Afghanistan, told NBC News, "I've buried my best friend under the flag, and if I know today that my comrade could be treated like unacceptable cargo, then no apology is ever enough." She isn't sorry for her actions, she's sorry for the fallout, and that is unacceptable. Across social media platforms, people dissected every phrase of Evelyn Grant's speech. Language experts and communications analysts pointed out, there was no personal admission of fault from the CEO, no promise of compensation or procedural changes, no clear roadmap for remedy. Veteran PR specialist Marcia Benton wrote on LinkedIn, "This is a masterclass in how not to apologize. The video doesn't address human pain, it addresses stock prices." And while the nation seethed, Marcus Jackson remained silent. Reporters continued to camp out at his Maryland suburban home, but all received the same response. Colonel Jackson is not speaking to the press. He is fulfilling the rest of his mission. Indeed, he offered no rebuttals, filed no lawsuits, posted no social media statements. He understood that an apology offered only when one is unmasked does nothing to restore honor. He didn't need an apology. He needed change. Inside National Jet, the pressure continued to mount. A group of minority shareholders began petitioning for an emergency board meeting, with one clear aim, to move a vote of no confidence in Evelyn Grant. What looked originally like it might be buried under a brief, cold corporate video had become a life-or-death battle for public trust. Because no one wants to fly an airline that treats a soldier's honor as if it's worth nothing more than an MP4 apology. While National Jet's offices continued to reel under pressure from public opinion, shareholders, and the press, Colonel Marcus Jackson was quietly completing his mission, a mission that required no media coverage and no public applause. At a small military airfield on the outskirts of the city, a white and blue C-40A Boeing, bearing Department of Defense markings, awaited its passengers. There were no flashy fences or red carpet ceremonies, only a solemn stillness shared by those who deeply understand the cost of sacrifice. Marcus climbed the aircraft's boarding ramp with even measured steps. In his left hand, he held his beret firmly, while his right rested gently on the lid of a U.S. flag-draped coffin, conveyed by a separate military vehicle. Under the pale, late-afternoon sun, the flag fluttered silently, as though whispering a message only a soldier could understand. Private First Class. Thomas Ellis, 21 years old, no longer spoke or breathed, but his presence in this cabin would be remembered by the entire nation. Belated, perhaps, but the final confirmation that he was not forgotten. No reporters, no hashtags, no live streams. Only 4 uniformed officers stood at attention on either side of the aisle, saluting as Marcus passed by. No introductions needed, no titles required. They knew who he was, and more importantly, they knew why he was here. Inside the aircraft's cabin, the air was cold and quiet. A single seat opposite Private Ellis's remains was left empty. Marcus sat there, back straight, his hands clasped together in his lap. No one spoke. No one needed to. Silence is the language of honor. During the more than 2-hour flight from New York to Savannah, Georgia, where Thomas's family awaited, Marcus did not sleep. He simply sat, occasionally glancing at the casket. His expression was not one of sadness, but of depth, like a lake that had weathered many storms. In his mind, there were no live streams. There was no apology from a CEO. All the noise outside was now a distant echo, because in this moment there was only one reality, a soldier coming home. He remembered the first time he escorted a fallen comrade, a close friend in Kosovo. At that time, he was barely in his 30s, still carrying dreams and the belief that the military was a place without discrimination or injustice. But the farther he traveled, the more he understood. No place is immune to prejudice. Only those who stand firm against it can truly defend the value of what is right. And today, he was doing more than bringing a soldier home. He was delivering a sobering reminder to the nation's conscience. When the aircraft touched down at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, the sun had begun to dip below the tree line. A military transport vehicle waited on the runway, flanked by a funeral detail. Not ostentatious, but solemn to the point of breathlessness. Thomas Ellis's family, the widowed mother, his sister still in high school, and a grandfather who had served in the Korean War, stood nearby, their faces wet with tears yet brimming with pride. No shouts or rushing steps, only slow, reverent approach as the casket was lowered to the vehicle. Marcus stepped forward, removed his beret, and bowed his head deeply before the mother. A gesture not of ceremony, but of respect. "He did not go alone," he said softly. "He returned with the honor he deserves." The mother nodded, but said nothing. She simply held his hand, firmly, for a long moment. That evening, at the small church where Thomas had attended catechism classes, a memorial service was held. No media, no sponsors, but an entire town rose together, shoulder to shoulder, lighting candles, standing in silence, remembering the boy who had once worn a football jersey and volunteered to enlist because he wanted to do something great. At the front of the sanctuary, a single empty chair had been placed, reserved for Colonel Marcus Jackson. He did not sit there. Instead, he stood at the side, beside the honor guard, as quietly resolute as the flag itself. No one spoke of National Jet that night. No one needed to mention the airline's name. For those gathered, the only flight that mattered had concluded, and it was the flight that had brought a son, a soldier, home to his country. The morning after Private First Class Thomas Ellis's memorial service, the Savannah sky was an unusually clear blue. The air was gentle and light, as if carrying the peace that follows a night when a community silently and honorably said goodbye to one of its own. While the media remained flooded with images of protests outside National Jet's headquarters and countless articles analyzing the fallout from the incident at JFK, Colonel Marcus Jackson maintained absolute composure. He had not spoken a word in the more than 3 days since everything erupted, despite hundreds of phone calls, emails, and interview requests. Then, on the 4th morning, after Thomas Ellis's remains had been laid to rest in Georgia's military cemetery, and his family was protected by a sacred hush, Marcus agreed to address the public. The speech took place at the local branch of the Veterans Affairs Office. Not a grand stage, not a large auditorium. He stood on a low platform with an American flag behind him, and Thomas's portrait beside it, surrounded by fellow veterans, local residents, and a handful of reporters. No lavalier microphone, no slogan banners, no props. There was only Marcus, in full-dress uniform, shoulders squared, gaze still deep, and his voice calm but carrying far. "I do not seek special privileges." He paused, letting that statement settle fully into the faces before him. Then he continued, slowly, as though reciting an oath etched into his heart. "I only seek respect for those who have fallen, those who can no longer speak, and those like Private First Class Thomas Ellis, who laid his heart on the battlefield asking for nothing more than one promise, that if they cannot return by their own 2 feet, they will return draped in honor." A few camera clicks echoed, but no one spoke. A veteran mother quietly wept. Former Marine Charles Baker, who had been the first to stand up at JFK, was there too, his eyes red. Marcus scanned the crowd. His eyes carried no bitterness, only an unspoken question. Do we still remember who it is we vowed never to leave behind? "I come here not to demand commendations or a private flight," he continued. "I come simply to ask all of us one question. If there had been no video, no live stream, no social media, how much longer would I have been held back that day? And how many more hours would Private First Class Ellis's body have been delayed in its journey home?" He paused. Silence settled all the way to the last row of seats. Respect is not a reward for the powerful. Respect is the foundation. And when we allow someone to be humiliated simply because they look different from us, we not only lose their honor, we lose ourselves. His words landed like a final blow to the conscience of a nation already weary of too many overdue apologies. After his speech, Marcus Jackson's story continued to be shared everywhere. But now, it was not just about discrimination. It became a symbol and a warning. If no one speaks up, injustice will repeat itself. And next time, there may be no social media to rescue an honor trampled in silence. Across military academies in the United States, instructors began incorporating this story into lessons on honor and ethics. Many civilian flight schools introduced mandatory training on respect for military duty and vulnerable communities. As for National Jet, CEO Evelyn Grant was voted out of power by the board of directors just 1 week after the incident. A new CEO was appointed, and the airline released a statement pledging to rebuild from the ground up. But most of the public understood that reputation cannot be rebuilt with slogans. And Marcus? He returned to his modest home in suburban Maryland. He accepted no compensation, wrote no memoir, signed no TV deals. He simply continued living as a soldier. A soldier who had completed his final mission, not just for a comrade, but for an entire nation that needed to be reminded. Honor is not optional. It is a responsibility. And if anyone ever asks him afterward how he feels now that it's all over, he will likely answer with only one sentence. I do not need anyone to remember my name, as long as they remember his, Thomas Ellis. There are flights that need not soar high to reach the hearts of a nation. And there are people, like Colonel Marcus Jackson, who do not seek glory, yet cause the world to fall silent with their calm resolve and unwavering devotion to honor. This story is more than a soldier's tale. It's a wake-up call about how we treat one another, when there are no studio lights, no social media, and no second chances to make things right. What about you? What do you think must change in our society so that people like Marcus Jackson never have to fight for the respect they deserved from the start? Share your thoughts below. We want to hear from you. And if you believe this story deserves to be shared, please hit like. Share this video with as many people as possible, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that move us with their courage, justice, and kindness. Because some stories should never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. See you next time.